Welcome to The Lover's Hole, a Patrick O'Brien podcast. Like every week, you're with Mike.
And with Ian.
As we reread the Aubrey Maturin canon of Patrick O'Brien. Ian, we're back in HMS Surprise.
Yeah.
What did we cover last week? Where are we going this week?
Well, Mike, thank you so much. Last time we were in the first chapter of HMS Surprise, we had a new First Lord, and we had started out with the expanded Admiralty Board declaring that the treasure ship gold taken at the end of the previous book would be droits of the crown rather than being prize money. In the same meeting, we had Stephen Maturin exposed as an intelligence agent. Stephen had been to visit Sophie in low spirits, being reminded, of course, that Diana is now the mistress of Mr. Canning and is in India with him. We had learned that Stephen had already collected intelligence on Diana and on Canning and on Canning's wife. Sir Joseph Blaine was worried about Stephen and about the idea that he might continue or try to continue his secret mission with his cover blown. But Stephen pressed ahead, hoping to fly ahead of the rumors to outrun them. That was last week. This week, Mike, it's chapter 2. We have Jack and the Lively blockading Toulon along with Nelson until new orders should come along. They're on short commons. Jack is hoping to distinguish himself once more before collecting Stephen and turning the Lively back over to Captain Hammond when they get to Gibraltar. We're going to have Jack writing to Sophie about the action that they encounter along the way. We're going to get insight into the crew of the Lively, character development for Killick and for Jack. And a Times article sparks celebration. And finally, an unexpected night meeting on a beach has our plants all starting to pay off. And Mike, I think the appropriate thing to say here is, dum, dum, dum.
I think you're absolutely right, Ian. Well, we're not much dum at the very beginning because we're part of Nelson's squadron going to and fro, and Jack and the Lively are in the inshore squadron watching Toulon, waiting for the French to come out, which of course they're not doing.
Right.
The last 3 days, it's been the constant Mistral wind. They're still making 7 knots with reduced sail and constantly wearing in succession. Now, even with its silent efficiency, the Lively's crew has to work harder and harder to avoid outrunning or overrunning the Melpomene, whose talents in sailing qualities, O'Brien writes, could not have recommended her anywhere. So, in this Mistral, this strong, cold northwesterly wind that blows through the Rhone Valley and southern France, mainly in winter, the name comes from the first part of the Latin for master wind. So this master wind. And the other word choice here, Melpomene. This, in mythology, the muse of tragedy and the mother of the siren. So certainly we don't want to outrun tragedy. And I wonder, is this O'Brien highlighting our tension a little bit? Is this a minor plan? I don't know. How are things going to go here?
Wouldn't it be delicious if that was so? Oh, good choice. So we have the perspective of the whole squadron. And we have now the perspective of just 2 very junior members of it, 2 midshipmen who up in the tops are looking out and seeing nothing, complaining about the constant wearing as they go back and forth on the blockade in a rigid line. It doesn't give a man a chance, they're saying to themselves. There's nothing to see, not a sausage, not even the smell of one. And we get, first of all, into the literal world of sausages, which just makes my mouth water. He's very upset, the second midshipman, that the first one has mentioned sausages, because he starts to fantasize about sausages, hot, crisp, squirting with juice as you bite him. Oh, bacon, mushrooms. And as he's going through this agony of remembering what a sausage tastes like, he's staring hard to see whether the Niobe might be coming back from her independent cruise, bringing some supplies with her. And of course, they're hoping and expecting that their turn is going to come next for an independent cruise once the Niobe joins in company here. The first midshipman pinches his mate, saying, "Shut up, the Lord is with us." And that's a reference to Jack, who has appeared on deck. And Mike, We're 8% of the way through the book, 32 pages in, and this is the first time we've met Jack Aubrey. All that time in the first chapter with just Stephen, and now we're back with Jack. By the way, I'll just dig into not a sausage. If you're a Cockney and you know rhyming slang, then sausage and mash means cash, no cash. Maybe I don't expect that the midshipmen were devout speakers of Cockney rhyming slang. So not a sausage, I think, would then be the more general British idiom meaning not a thing, not a sausage, not a bean, not a single thing. They're isolated. They're cut off from food, not only from sausages, but from everything else as well. So it's hard lying for the midshipmen. Mike, how is it for our friend Jack?
Well, it's interesting. Jack, he's come on deck. He's not bothering the crew. He and the crew are actually in good spirits despite these months of close blockade, what O'Brien calls the hardest and most wearisome duty in the service. For although, why are they in good spirits? Although wealth may not bring happiness, the immediate prospect of it provides a wonderfully close imitation. So, we don't have much in the way of supplies. There's not a sausage to be seen, but everybody's looking forward to the wealth from their prizes. The wealth that we just found out actually isn't coming, but they don't know. Jack is at the same time admiring the crew, admiring the ship, but keeping in mind that this is not mine. It's just a temporary command. And I think sometimes, like, we kind of build ourselves up for separations. He's kind of thinking, and they're so Whiggish, and I'm such a Tory. I'm, attached admiration. He's thinking, sort of like, as O'Brien writes, being in charge of a brother's wife, an elegant, chaste, unimaginative woman running her life on scientific principles. So, yeah, right.
This idea of the metaphor about the officer's wife, it makes me think of Oscar Wilde, like a kiss from your sister.
Right. Yeah. Having just come from the importance of being earnest this past weekend, I do in mind of Oscar Wilde.
Excellent. Jack, then, the lord who is with the midshipmen, climbs into the top with his telescope to look into the harbour of Toulon. He can see former English ships in the outer bay, the outer road, the outer rad. These are the ones that were captured, I think, back in Master and Commander. They've been put there to vex the squadron. And vexed the squadron surely has become. They see also all of the French ships in the inner harbour. He examines how prepared they are, their state of readiness. He notes that this is all partly out of duty, partly so that he's got a reason to go into the tops to get some exercise because he's putting on weight, but also because he likes the feel of the shrouds in his hands, and the swing and the roll of the ship makes him happy. Jack sees the inn far inshore where he and Stephen had that wonderful meal with Christy Pallier. And he thought of that dinner, and that makes his stomach twinge because he is also a midshipman at heart. He's well aware of the absence of sausages and how they're all on short rations right now. He's also aware that he misses Stephen's company. And Mike, I remember reading through this, and it took me a couple of goes to remind myself that this whole chapter is without Stephen present here. Despite the lack of supplies, Jack is still in the habit of dining with the gunroom weekly. He gets invited by them. He's in the habit of breakfasting with the officer of watch and the midshipman of the watch. But this doesn't equate to cheerfulness because the Lively's got this very formal, strict naval etiquette that prevents subordinates from speaking to the captain without being spoken to first. And here we get the first of many mentions of loneliness. We learn that the men and the officers of the Lively really value Jack as a seaman and as a fighting captain, but they have imposed on him this Olympian role. And the text writes about how the silence in which he lives makes him feel utterly forlorn. So Jack is feeling lonely. He's keeping busy about the ship. He's helping to supervise the afternoon lessons for the midshipmen. And these are a cheerful, likeable bunch of midshipmen who so far are not very terribly constrained or repressed by the presence of the captain or by the schoolmaster's severity or by their hunger. And they've been taking care of that by eating rats at ever-increasing cost, sold to them, caught and cleaned by the captain of the hold. So, Mike, we've got different parts of the ship's company coping with hunger in their different ways here.
Right. But you had pointed out that Jack is attending their afternoon lessons. And, O'Brien tells us that Jack has always been a natural seaman, but he was really bad at numbers as a youth. And he only passed for lieutenant by rote learning and two friendly captains on the board that examined him. This despite Queenie having tried to teach him spherical trigonometry, but his navigation, it didn't take. Navigation's always been rule of thumb from A to B, but he didn't actually have to step up because the Navy always provided a naval master learned in the art. However, now Jack, a little older and inspired by the scientific hydrographic atmosphere of the Lively, he's studying the mathematics along with the midshipmen and is progressing rapidly. He's working lunars at night, reading even more advanced text when he isn't playing his fiddle or writing to Sophie. And Jack's thinking to himself, he thinks he's so delighted at the progress he's making. And the text says, "How amazed Stephen will be," he reflected. "How I shall come at the philosopher over him. How I wish the old soul were here."
So a little reminder to us that Stephen is absent, and that means something to Jack. That's a real dampener on Jack's spirits here. Now, Jack's going to get some more from the folks who are around him in the tops here. The captain of the top, a personage by the excellent name of High Bum, coughs and says in a Cockney voice, despite the fact that he's clearly Chinese, he has a yellow face and slanting eyes. He says, "Beg pardon, Your Honour, but I think Naiad's seen something." The Lively had spent so much time in Eastern waters that they have lots of her crew who are from China or from Southeast Asia. And despite their Chinese heritage, they all have accents of Docklands, East London. And O'Brien says these are places like Limehouse, Reach, Wapping, and Deptford Yard. And those are all pretty colourful places in the Docklands in the old days, but they've all been kind of redeveloped now and they're slightly more fancy. But 7-year-old Mr. Randall Jr., the little ship's boy whose father is one of the lieutenants, comes in from his spray-soaked post out on the spritsail yardarm and cries, "She's rounding the point!" And the Niobe there comes through the mist from some nearby islands, and now everyone is excited. This is the moment when they might get to turn over to an independent cruise, but more immediately, she might be bringing food and prizes. And there was a deal in place for all of the inshore squadron frigates to share if one of them got a prize on a detached cruise. The child cries, "And here's the Weasel." Now, the Weasel is the cutter that's kind of acting as a sort of tender to the squadron here. A big cutter bringing stores and news of the outside world decides to challenge the Niobe to a race, takes the wind out of her sails, shoots past her cheering, and flies the signal, "Orders for Lively." And as the Weasel comes alongside, she launches no boat, which means there are going to be no stores, and damn this is what Jack thinks. But he does see that there are post bags coming across on a line. So that's enough to get Jack shooting down from up in the rigging like a midshipman. Anxious for his mail, he can already see there that there's a fat parcel of letters from Sophie, but dutiful to the last, he opens his official orders first and signals Naiad for permission to part company. So, Mike, I wonder what's in the orders here.
Boy, it's a great question. I think everybody on board is getting ready to go on their independent cruise.
Yeah.
But they're headed for a rendezvous in Minorca. And for once, perhaps the only time in the canon, they've got plenty of time to spare. Jack is sorry that Stephen's not there to see the one time when there's no violent hurry, no losing not a minute, forsooth. And Jack doesn't want to arrive too early and stand off and on, by the island, arousing suspicion, he thinks. He's happy to have some time to exercise the wide latitude of his general orders to, as they say, disturb the enemy's shipping installations and communications. Well, the next morning's gunnery practice does away with what's now yesterday's cross looks and discontented murmurs. Again, they had been scheduled for this independent cruise. They were going to be able to pick up supplies, maybe some prize money as soon as the Niobe returned. But with the Weasels cracking on and showing away, that had been ruined. They're all thinking, if the Weasel had come a little slower, we'd already been gone. However, Yeah, text says the comfortable, pervading sense of wealth tomorrow had restored the liveliest complacency. So yet
Yeah,
again,
doesn't it
hey, don't
always?
worry, man, we've got it made. We got all this prize money coming. And Jack feels this from throughout the crew as he takes a turn around the deck before going to his cabin to receive his guests. He also feels a little emotion with it, and he thinks not envy, since, as this text says, he's wealthier in passe than the whole group put together. And he's thinking this, but he keeps his fingers perpetually crossed. This
Ah,
impasse, Latin for impossibility or potentially. Jack, if he gets the prize money, will be wealthier than the whole group altogether. But Jack, knows that it's never certain. So he's got these fingers crossed. But then he thinks, it might be envy too. They have a ship, they have a tight knit community, and I don't.
yeah.
And then he's continuing to think, yet not exactly envy, not as who would say envy when the bell strikes 4 and Jack, kind of comes back to the present moment, hurries to the cabin where Killick and his mates are standing by the decanters looking wooden.
Because it's dinner time and Jack had nearly missed it.
Right.
We get a little bit of dialogue between Jack and Killick now. All a tanto, Killick, he said. Stock and fluke, sir, said his steward, looking beyond him and signalling with an elegant jerk of his chin. All right, we're going to talk later on about how we're enjoying getting Killick more front and center in this book and in this chapter in particular. Let's just explain the word choices there. All a tanto means is all laid along, is everything okay, referring to a ship being tant or taut rigged when she's had her masts all rehoisted, having previously struck them. So all a tanto, all taut, all shipshape. Stock and fluke means it's all there. Stock and the fluke being the two major parts of the anchor. If you've got the stock and you've got the fluke, you've got most of your anchor, right? So he's trying to say everything's there from soup to nuts, you might say.
Well, soup to nuts, all well and good, except, if you look at the picture of the anchor, the thing that holds it all together is the shank. And I think we don't want to neglect mentioning that.
I don't think we do. So many things in life are held together by shanks. Excellent.
Right.
Take it away, Mr. Shanks, sir.
Oh, bless you. So Jack turns to follow the direction of Killick's chin, and as you kind of alluded to, he sees all his guests have been standing there waiting for him. Well, he greets them and welcomes them. Simmons, the first lieutenant, the chaplain, Lord Garin, the third lieutenant, who I don't think we've met yet, Mr. Fielding, another lieutenant, Mr. Dashwood, the father of young Mr. Dashwood Jr., a lieutenant. They all take their seats. Jack apologizes for the dinner, a Barmecide feast at best, given this lack of supplies. And Jack, as he's talking, notices a bargeman, what he calls the larger of the reptiles that crawled from Old Biscuit in his mind, swimming in the chaplain's bowl. And Jack's afraid that the chaplain, having not been long at sea, won't realize that there's nothing wrong with a bargeman, as Jack's thinking nothing of the common weevil's bitterness, but it might put the chaplain off his food. So he tells Killick, oh, there's a hair in the chaplain's soup. Please bring him another bowl. And I'm thinking, wow, this is you can clearly tell, folks that have been here for a while, being on short comments. Ooh, look at that big juicy, larva in the soup. Man, can't wait to get my teeth into that. Oh, chaplain probably won't feel the same. Well, so first, Barmecide. Let me do that.
Which sounds like something that you kind of sterilize kitchen equipment in.
Doesn't it though? Right. We use this to wash it off. And having just had the reference to weasels and larvae and everything makes the sense. But Barmecide is actually an illusory or imaginary and therefore disappointing something. In this case, the feast. It comes from the prince in the Arabian Nights Entertainment, who gave a beggar a feast consisting of ornate but empty dishes. So that, per the New Oxford Dictionary.
And how about a bargeman? Presumably that's not an actual man from an actual barge, right?
No. It's probably the larva of the Cadell beetle. We'll put a social media picture of the larvae with a canon reference in a discussion about weevils and larvae and everything. The beetle's scientific name, Ian, you want to give me a hand on this one?
Tenebroides mauritanicus.
Yeah, and it's interesting that Mauritanikus, referring back to its origin in Africa, makes us think of Mauritius, wondering, I'm sure this didn't give O'Brien a hint for the title of his next book. No, couldn't be here. But we'll post something out on Ship's Biscuit and Weevils and Bargemen. As you'll see, there's a little bit of debate and discussion how much of this was real, how much of this was the fanciful imagination of earlier fiction writers that gets carried down, kind of like the Q document to biblical scholars.
Yeah, interesting. It's if you want to play really, really long Patrick O'Brien ball, it's an anticipation of a very, very famous Patrick O'Brien joke that's not going to arise in the canon for several books yet to come. But let's just leave that there for now.
That's true. That's true. These articles may give you a bit of a spoiler, especially if you haven't seen the movie. If you've seen the movie,
Indeed.
you're fine here. Yeah. But just fun to come.
Now, Jack gets to address the whole of the gunroom here. He says that he wanted to invite them, particularly because this might well be the last time that he'll have the honor of their company like this. They're headed for Gibraltar by way of Minorca. In Gibraltar, Captain Hammond is going to return to the ship. And given the orders that he has to harass enemy coastal installations, there's not going to be much leisure for dining. So maybe this is kind of his farewell dinner to the other officers here. He hopes that on this cruise they're going to find something worthy of the lively, and he gives a little classical note by mentioning the merits of placing a sprig of laurel on her bow, and that is the cue for a bit of genteel conversation about laurel. The captain asks if wild laurel grows in this area, and he says that he thought it was Greek because it's mentioned so often in the writing of the ancients. And he says, the ancients do not notice the coast of Languedoc, meaning, I'm a scholar and I've read about the Greeks and I've got no notion of these pesky French. And Jack replies, why? It has been gathered there, sir, I believe. It is said to go uncommon well with fish. A leaf or two gives a haut relivio, whatever that is. We'll talk about that in a moment. But more is deadly poison. Now, this idea of haut relivio is a French or Italian kind of anglicized phrase meaning a good tang, a good savor, or a good taste. And more being deadly poison sounds like the kind of ominous statement we often get about kind of herbs and plants. Mike, you and I dug into this at some length. Bay laurel, the Mediterranean laurel bush, is not toxic, and the leaves are used as bay leaves as we know them in cooking. But there are plenty of other laurel species, plenty of which are toxic, especially in reasonably large quantities. And therefore, maybe Jack's got the deadly poison part slightly wrong, but still, we've got the idea of laurel, might be tasty, or it might kill you. And maybe there's something a bit deeper there. Maybe there's an interesting association. An ominous cranking up of tension or foreshadowing. Laurel being a symbol of victory, maybe looking back, there's a warning to Jack and the crew that the fruits of their recent victory aren't going to be quite as grand or as sweet tasting as they're all supposing. Maybe going after laurel, going after victory is going to hurt them all as we go forward with the story here. Who knows? Let's see.
So Jack credits their good fish dish, the one decent dish they have in this meal, to John's satisfaction, one of the Chinamen, who he says caught it over the side using a yarn made from his messmate's pigtails. So, very resourceful, kind of starting some of our insights into some of the crew here on the Lively here. And he gives Dr. Maturin credit for the excellent wine and says, oh, by the way, we're going to be touching at Minorca to pick the doctor up. And the officers say that, they're going to be delighted to see him again. But the chaplain's a little perplexed and he asks, whoa, didn't we give Minorca back to the Spaniards? Jack says, oh, yes, we did. But, the doctor has land in those parts. He probably has a pass to travel. And they get into this discussion about people who've been allowed to travel in spite of the war. One who had made a religious vow and traveled as a private gentleman on a religious pilgrimage. And Lord Garin says, he just read a Times article about a scientific cove from Birmingham who'd gone over to Paris to accept a prize from their institute. He adds that Dr. Maturin is a smasher in the scientific line.
Smasher like a cannon.
Right.
But he really means in the sense of, preserving people rather than smashing them to bits. Oh, indeed he is, cried Jack. A sort of Admiral Crichton. Whip your leg off in a moment. Tell you the Latin name of anything that moves. His eye caught a brisk yellow weevil hurrying across the tablecloth. Speaks languages like a walking Tower of Babel, all except ours. Dear Lord, he said, laughing heartily, to this day I don't believe he knows the odds between port and starboard. Suppose we drink his health. With all my heart, sir, cried the first lieutenant with a conscious look at his shipmates, all of whom shared it more or less, as Jack had noticed at their first appearance in the cabin. And Mike, before we get to talk about what they're about to drink to and what's going on in these furtive glances between the lieutenants, tell us about Admiral Crichton.
Well, it's interesting. It's a little bit of an O'Brien joke, a bit at Jack's expense, kind of like Aubreyism, poor foreign language skills, misquotes. The man Jack's referring to here is a historically accurate Scottish prodigy, the admirable, not admiral, James Crichton. He's called the admirable because of his command of many languages and philosophical tenets from a very early age. So easy guy to kind of think of when thinking of Stephen, but not an admiral. Sorry, Jack.
So now we get to go back to this toast that's being drunk in the wardroom. Simmons, who had just said, with all my heart, sir, added in that there was a piece in the Times which Lord Garron had noticed, which had what he called a far more interesting announcement, a piece of news that filled the gunroom, which has the liveliest recollection of Miss Williams, with unbounded enthusiasm. Sir, may I offer you our heartiest congratulations and wish you joy from all of us, and suggest that there is one toast which should take precedence even over Dr. Maturin. And Mike, it's a lovely moment here because we're remembering that Jack and Sophie are engaged. We're learning that this is now public news, and we're getting this nice warm feeling of fellowship with the wardroom of the Lively, who Jack had been finding himself a little bit separate from. So this is lovely. On the other hand, though, we're missing Stephen, and it's another little reminder that Jack misses Stephen, and we're all kind of feeling he's absent. Jack, I think, can't wait to see him again.
Yeah, O'Brien has kind of this fascinating juxtaposition here. Jack proposes the toast to Stephen, and the attention is immediately turned back to Sophie. And Stephen, once again, while he comes up, he's getting pushed into the background. And in my own mind, I thought, it's like people you say, don't think about a pink elephant. Well, of course, now I can't think about anything else. So, Stephen, no, something else. Stephen, no, something, okay, don't think about Stephen here. I'm wondering, with Jack gone all first chapter, Stephen missing all this chapter, just following that potential duel in post-captain where one or both of them might have been continuously missing forever, thinking, I don't know how he does this, but I sure do love it.
Yeah, it's great. And he's giving us tension at the beginning of the story. Like the end of Post-Captain was Jack and Stephen are friends together again. And now at the beginning of this story, Jack and Stephen might well be friends, but they're apart. Now, in order to get another change of perspective, we get to look over Jack's shoulder as he writes to Sophie. And he writes to tell her about the men in the gunroom drinking her health in 3x3, and that he only just read their engagement announcement in the Times himself after Simmons had told him about it. And he's writing to Sophie that Simmons had said the handsomest things about you. They had the liveliest recollection of Miss Williams in the Channel, all too short, your most devoted, etc. And Jack describes how he had hung his head like a maiden, and upon my honour I was near hand blubbering like one. I so longed for you to be by me in this cabin again. It brought it back so clear. And it's really touching that Jack is so deep in his longing for Sophie and so candid with her about how he feels. Meanwhile, Simmons in the reported dinner had asked whether Sophie would prefer a teapot or a coffee pot with a suitable inscription from the gunroom. And Jack describes how he had told them to go for a coffee pot because Jack and Sophie's household is going to be a coffee house, and had begged that the inscription might say that the Lively preserved the liveliest memory. And that particular pun had been very, very well received Even, says Jack, the parson, a dull dog, had laughed hearty once the bon mot, once the witticism had been explained to him. Happy times, mate. So with the undercurrent of missing Stephen, I think Jack's doing okay. And despite the shortcomings, everybody's getting fed. This might be a good moment for us all to go and check our mail and grab a little something from the wardroom table and join us back after this short break.
Welcome back. Hope you have a little refreshment, a little better than short commons. And we're rejoining Jack as he continues his letter to Sophie, describing the Livelies taking a French signal station by landing a couple miles away, walking across the dunes, sand filling their eyes and flintlocks, and coming up from behind. As they come up, all the Frenchmen flee except for one little ensign, who Jack tells her fought like a hero until Bondin collared him from behind, and he threw down his sword and cried. He says they spiked all the guns, destroyed the semaphore, blew up the magazine with its own powder, and then went back to the boats carrying the French signal book. So a nice prize here. Jack compliments the Livelies in his letter, saying, they aren't used to this type of work, but they have, they shaping up well. They have willing minds. Now, he goes on to tell her that the little French officer told them that if his brother aboard the Diomed had still been on the coast, they would not have been able to show their faces without getting blown out of the water. That ship had gone to Port Vendre 3 days, or was it 3 hours before. His French was so quick that they couldn't be certain. And then the sea got rougher and the poor lad got sick and spoke no more. Ian, interesting geographical reference here.
Right. I think we mentioned this when we did our much, much quicker read through many episodes ago. Port Vendre is the medium-sized harbour town right next to Collioure, which is the smaller harbour town. Both of these are in the far southwest of France on the coast right next to the border with Spain, where Patrick O'Brien and his wife lived at the time that he was writing all of these books and where he's buried to this day. So, Jack says, not realizing the connection to the author, Jack says, I would love to meet the Diomed, one of the French Navy's heavy 48 18-pounder guns. He's longing for a meeting with a heavy frigate like this, even more so now that he's going to have to give up the Lively in just a few days. And he's writing all of this to Sophie and says, please don't think bad of me, but this is my last chance to distinguish myself. And he says he needs to go and find a battle with another ship. As anyone will tell you, a ship is as necessary to a sailor as a wife in wartime. Not at once, of course, but well before everything is over. And it's a little bit of an ambiguous sentence, Mike. I think he's saying, I need a battle, not today, but before the war ends. What do you think?
And I'm wondering, I need a wife. Not necessarily today, before the war ends. I don't know. It was great. Right, I just love how O'Brien just sort of catches you up like this with these little ambiguous things that probably, it's one of the great things about reading the canon over and over again, because I'll probably see different things in it each time.
Yeah. So the Lively heads into Port Vendre. They talk to some fishing boats along the way, buy all of their catch to compensate for the intelligence that they're going to get from them. They promised to leave the fishermen to their boats if they would answer some questions about the Diomed. Was the Diomed in Port Vendre? Yes, perhaps. Was she gone for Barcelona? Well, maybe. Were they a pack of tomfools that did not understand French or Spanish? Yes, monsieur, spreading their hands to show they were only jack puddings and sorry for it. Which is funny because, of course, in that part of France, they'll speak Catalan. And, of course, they're not going to speak French nor Spanish particularly well, but it's nice that Jack is interpreting them as owning up to their ignorance of proper languages. They had even asked for the help of that young, courageous French ensign that they'd captured. They asked him to speak to the fishermen, and they got in return a speech about being amazed that a British officer should forget himself so much as to accept help from an interrogated prisoner. And, says the text, they got a piece about honour and pâté which would have been uncommon edifying, I dare say, if we could have understood it at all. And honor and pâté, that's nothing to do with pastry, right?
No, honor and the fatherland. Which, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, I get it. What a great kid this one
Yeah.
is. I just love
He's
it.
got quite the spirit.
Right. Well, Jack has them go look into the port in one of these barcalongas, one of these fishing boats. And Jack starts to describe the port, or O'Brien perhaps does to us. It was long with a dog leg, narrow at the mouth, protected by a mole and two batteries, one on each side, and another battery of 14 pounders high up on the Bière. It's very hard to get in and out of given the constant north wind, the tramontane that blows across the harbor mouth. Now, Randall goes in, takes this Barcalonga, and he does see a big square rigged vessel at the far end, but he can't be sure that it's the Diomed or not.
Ah. So, just like with in Toulon on a large scale, they had to get in closer to see exactly what was there. Now in Port Vendres, they're going to have to find a way to get in closer. Now, a Barcalonga, we're going to hear a lot about Barcalongas in this chapter, is a 2 or 3 masted sailing ship with a lug sail, like a triangular Latin lug sail. Very widely used on the coast of Spain and Portugal. You can still see them these days as kind of historic ships in the harbour towns of the Mediterranean. The Royal Navy also used these kind of boats as shore raiders or dispatch boats, although generally not owned and commissioned by the Navy, but kind of on loan. If you want to follow Port Vendres and Cap Bayard and Collioure on all these different places, go and check out Tom Horn's excellent website, cannonade.net, and follow the journey of this particular book, HMS Surprise. Now, it's a long, deep harbour. There's the north wind blowing, so they're going to have to use a bit of seamanship. So what they do is they lay out 5 hawsers end to end. The offshore end of this long set of hawsers is their best bower anchor sunk firm in some ooze, and they use that so they can warp the ship back out of the harbour into the wind if anything goes wrong, or when the raid is over, or if the battery should knock away some spars. The ship's boys get dressed up as Marines and head around the coast in the ship's boats. And I think this trip around the coast is more or less a reference to them going to Collioure, which is over the headland in the next bay to the west. Meanwhile, all the horse soldiers went pounding along the coast road to stop these boys dressed as Marines from landing, which left the coast a little bit clearer in Port Vendres. They sent the Barcalongas crammed full of men under their hatches before daylight around to the other side of Cap Bayard, that's to the east. They were going to dash ashore at a signal and land on a beach on the other side of the Cape and come up behind the southern battery of Port Vendres and take it. So they do indeed take the battery. They turn its guns on the other battery and knock out what was left of it after the frigate had done her own bombardment. So it's all going great. The boats come back to the ship. Everyone jumps in while the frigate continues to pour fire onto the coast road to keep those cavalry soldiers from coming back. They pull to the end of the harbour to cut out the Diomed, but she's not there. There's just a hulking great store ship. They took her partly down the harbour, but an unlucky wind gust from the mountains got her stuck fast in the harbour mouth. This has echoes, Mike, of the action against the Fantula written all over it here.
Right.
So they burned her to the waterline, set fire to everything else except the fishing boats, blew up the military works, collected all their people. Always military mayhem, coordinated by Jack Aubrey in the harbour here. Who is out there but Killick, shopping amidst all the destruction, picking up soft tack, fresh milk, butter, and coffee, and as many eggs as he could get into his hat. And Jack is really pleased to know. Again, this is all being reported in a letter to Sophie. He's really pleased to report how well the Livelies behaved. No drunkenness, no looting. And the Marines were formed up on the quay in neat checkered shirts and seamen's frocks. They all got back into the boats and headed for the frigate. And Mike, it's funny how this is not told in the first person, and as a result, it's got much less tension. It's much more easygoing. It's easier to enjoy as an anecdote than the emotional kind of drama and hectic scenes in the Fantula just 1 or 2 chapters before the end of Post Captain.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And O'Brien uses this fascinating device, at least in my Kindle. he's kind of they changed in the layout of the text, so you could kind of
Ah,
say, okay, this is single space. This is what Aubrey's
yeah.
actually writing to Sophie. Some of it is also in his head. So here, before I think O'Brien wasn't distinguishing because it was all fine, but now we're seeing, okay, this is what's written, and I'm paraphrasing it though, that the battery up on the Cape is firing down on the frigate when they're all returning in their boats, and a couple of gunboats come down the coast to get between the frigate and the returning boats, peppering them with grape from their 18-pounders. Jack, says there's nothing to be done but to close with him, and he's in his launch. He's got some men with him, and they close. And when they're just about to board the closest gunboat, half of Jack's people in the launch with him, mostly Chinamen or Malays, dive into the water while the other half crouch low against the gunwale. So Jack's thinking, what? What's going on here? Bond and Killick and a midshipman, Butler, in the boat with him, give somewhat of a cheer as they come alongside the gunboat. They're kind of ready to board. And Jack's telling himself, boy, I am laid by the lee now. I've got a set of followers that won't follow me. And the remaining ones give their sickly cheer and jump on board. And so, you were pointing out, this just echoes this moment in Post Captain when Jack realizes that many of his crew are following him to cut out the Fanchula. But here, they're not. They're not right now. Jack's thinking, my gosh, I'm going aboard. These guys are not going with me. There's many of those folks and only a handful of us.
Yeah.
Jack still knows that there's scope for his leadership to go wrong.
Right.
Thinking back in the past, thinking in the present, possibly in the future.
Oh, goodness me. Jeopardy for Jack here.
Yeah.
We're back in Jack's point of view here as he pauses writing, and the ink dries on his pen, and we get this little reflection from inside Jack's own perspective. The impression was still immensely strong. The Chinese swarming over the side at the last second to avoid the musketry, silently tackling their men in pairs, one tripping him up, ignoring blows, the other cutting his throat to the bone, instantly leaving him for the next. Systematic, efficient, working from aft forward with nothing but a few falsetto cries of direction. No fury, no hot rage. And immediately after the first assault, the Java men shooting up the other side, having dived under the keel, their wet brown hands gripping the rail all along the gunboat's length. Frenchmen shrieking, running up and down the slippery deck, the great lateen flapping to and fro, and still that silent close work, knife alone, and cords, a terrible, quiet eagerness. And Mike, it's grim. We're going to discover in the next paragraph just how grim, but he could have had more faith in his Chinese and his Malays, right? They were right there, but they were going to do the business in their way.
So the man that Jack is fighting, something he thinks he's remembering thick set and determined, all of a sudden just goes over the side right in front of him with the red water clouding in around him. So, Jack's in the midst of this, and one of the crew members has come up from behind him and slit his throat and sent him over. And Jack hears himself shouting. So kind of, we've seen this in some of the action scenes before with all the cannons going and everything. And, it's almost Jack hearing himself in third person because of all this going on around him. He's hearing himself shouting, belay that sheet, down with her helm, prisoners to the forehatch. And then the text says, and Bondin's shocked reply, there ain't no prisoners, sir. And then the deck, it says, bright red in the sun, the Chinamen squatting in pairs, methodically, quickly stripping the dead, the Malays piling the heads in neat heaps like round shot, and one routing in the belly of a corpse. Two men at the wheel already, they're spoiled next to them in a bundle, the sheet properly belayed. He had seen some ugly sights. The slaughterhouse of a 74 during a hard-fought fleet engagement, boardings by the dozen, the Bay of Abukir after the Orion blew up, but he felt his stomach close and heave. The taking was professional as anything could be, and it sickened him with his trade.
Really
Wow.
grim. So much for the Chinese and the Malays being shy, right? They have
Right.
their own way of going about the business of warfare, and Jack is really sickened by it. It's fantastic writing. We were talking in the Q&A episode a couple of weeks ago about favorites and about O'Brien as a literary writer, but in genre fiction you'd be hard pushed to find writing like this. Oh, it's great. And Jack is kind of wondering this to himself in a way. How do you convey all this when you're no great hand with a pen? Well, ask O'Brien to do it, because with a good author it can be done, apparently. Anyhow, Jack is back into letter writing mode, and as he's doing this, he's gazing down at his forearm. There's fresh blood still oozing through the bandage, and he realizes that he hasn't got the slightest wish to convey any of the blood. Partly, I guess, because he doesn't want to tell Sophie that he was putting himself at risk, and he doesn't want to have to try and give words to his feelings and his observations of this really grisly piratical slaughter by the Asian members of the crew. As far as dear Sophie was concerned, life at sea was to be, why, not exactly an internal picnic, but something not altogether unlike. Occasional hardships, to be sure, shortage of coffee, fresh milk, vegetables, and guns going off every now and then, and a clash of swords, but without any real people getting hurt. Those that happened to die did so instantly from wounds that could not be seen. They were only figures in the casualty list. So he wants to preserve this slightly artificial, you might say Hollywood version of naval warfare for Sophie, and he dips his pen to continue the letter. And he says he was mistaken about his men. They had boarded over both sides, behaved remarkably, and it was over in a few minutes. That's his summary of what we've just been hearing about. The other gunboats now sheer off. They rejoin the Lively and they make sail double quick. And now they're underway. They've got their gunboat with them. They can't drop down to Barcelona to pursue the Diomed, which is who they'd been after in the first place in Port Vendre, because they'll be late for their rendezvous in Minorca. And Jack is not going to be late, he writes, picking up his particular friend, even if Stephen so often can't manage to be on time. So there we have, Mike. That action is over. We're off to fetch Stephen. What could possibly go wrong?
Jack wonders if Sophie might say Jack should not have gone ashore in this action, should have left it to Simmons, his first lieutenant, a great chance for him to distinguish himself. And Jack tells her he could not tell how the people would behave. It's not that he doubted their conduct, but they were probably better, he thought, in a defensive battle or a regular fleet action. They might have lacked the speed and dash for this kind of thing because they haven't practiced it. They really haven't done any cutting out before Jack was here. Jack, scheduled the attack in broad daylight so he could be there, see if anything was going wrong, and he's glad he did, he tells Sophie. There were some nip and tuck moments. But on the whole, they all behaved well, especially the Marines. The ship was hauled in a few places and suffered damage, but they could fight an action again tomorrow, he says. And they had very small losses. And I think he's thinking, have I let too much slip here? And
Yeah.
He writes, the text says, her captain suffered from nothing but extreme apprehension for his personal safety and the total loss of his breakfast cup, shattered in being struck down into the hold on clearing for action. But I promise not to do so again, and this is a promise I dare say fate will help me keep, for if this wind holds, I should be in Gibraltar in a few days, with no ship to do it from. Do it from, he wrote again, and leaning his head on his arms, he went fast asleep.
Oh. It's completely alien to me, the idea of a married man communicating his wife and falling asleep halfway through a sentence. That's never happened to me. Oh, goodness me, no. Well, he'll learn.
I do remember working late into the night and falling asleep and dreaming, but my hands still typing away. And as I proofread the text in the morning, there was the dream starting up. And there was me waking back up and continuing on with my thoughts.
Oh, goodness me.
I'm glad that I'm sure Jack, with the aftermath of the action and the aftermath of, oh my God, what do I tell Sophie? What do I not tell her? What's going to happen when I've got to get out of this ship? Yeah, I can see him being pretty exhausted and falling right there asleep in his ink.
Bless him. Well, they're off across the northern Mediterranean. We pick the action up as they're closing in with the island of Minorca. Just a couple of days' sail, I guess, from where they were. Jack says keep standing off and on because there they are off the Bay of Fornells, which is a deep bay in the northeastern corner of Minorca, kind of halfway around the island from Mahon. Jack asks Simmons then, is the gunboat cleared up? This is the gunboat that was taken in the action in Port Vendres, involving all of the bloody antics of the Chinese and the Malays. Simmons apologizes and says she is not yet. And Jack is aware that Simmons had a really hard day the previous day, had barked his shins cruelly running up the stone stairs in the attack, but he's surprised to look over and see that the gunboat has not been cleaned at all. There's bright red all over the deck, now kind of faded to a blackish brown, and there's a severed hand, which had been so bright on the previous day, now looking like a huge dead dark spider. And Jack looks around at everyone repairing the ship, and with what he means to be a smile, he says to Simmons, first things first, and maybe he thinks we'll get to send her away this evening, but I want to have a look over the gunboat first before she gets sent away with a prize crew. And this is a sad moment for Simmons. He's never had cause to be told off by Jack about anything much, and he's hobbling along just about keeping pace and presented with the fact that he's a little bit short in his chores, one of which was to clean up the gunboat here. Jack looks into Simmons' face and can see that he's so concerned that Jack decides he's about to say something kind of softening to placate Simmons a little bit when Killick appears. And all of the potential goodwill and charity of the situation is evaporated by the presence of Killick, who crossly tells Jack that coffee is up. And as he stomps away, Jack can overhear Killick grousing about how long the coffee's been out and how it's been let to get cold. All of this sounds like it's Killick talking to the Marine sentry just outside the cabin door. But we read, the sentry's look of shocked horror, of refusal to hear or participate in any way, was in exact proportion to the respect, even to the awe in which Jack was held in the ship. So there's something new and delightful going on here, Mike. Give us a little bit more of it before we talk about what it is.
Well, I think Jack pulls out his old softening comment, but sends it towards Killick, and he's sitting in the cabin and says, Killick, the coffee is prime. And Killick just makes a surly grunt and says, I suppose you'll be wanting another old pot, sir. And O'Brien goes on to tell us Killick was a cross-grained bastard who supposed that if he sprinkled his discourse with a good many sirs, the words in between did not signify. So Jack's sitting there, he's humming a piece from Figaro, and he was reminding himself, hey, Killick's the guy who brought all the supplies from shore in the midst of battle, who served them hot this morning to me while the rest of the ship dealt with a galley having been knocked sideways from the fire from the fort. And O'Brien writes, Jack had known Killick ever since his first command, and as he had risen in rank, so Killick's sullen independence had increased. He was angrier than usual now because Jack had wrecked his number 3 uniform and lost one of his gloves. And you hear the voice of Killick, which, Ian, you do much better than me here.
I thank you for the chance to read this out. I really love this bit of dialogue. Coat torn in 5 places, cutlass slash in the forearm, which how can I ever darn that? Bullet hole all singed, never get the powder marks out. Breeches all a-hoo, all this nasty blood everywhere, like you've been a wallowing in a lay stall, sir. What miss would say, I don't know. God strike me blind. Epaulette, act, fair act, to pieces. Jesus, what a life. And I read this and I smile and I love it. And I think this is the Killick that I know. But maybe we should talk a bit more about this later on. But this is really some of the first proper outings for Killick and his cross-grained character. And, and I love that this comes at the same time as his reminder that actually, Jack says, life is good. Killick's a miserable bastard. He's got all of this other work that he's doing to keep me well fed and safe and happy, and that's a good thing.
I think, like you were saying, that with Killick and Jack and everything, I can't help but think, both of them in their own way are sometimes in this little chapter kind of thinking, oh, well, this is tough. This is tough. But probably both of them also thinking, hey, man, what a life I've got here.
Yeah, exactly.
This is pretty good. I really don't want to lose this. It's awful, but I don't want to lose it. So, Jack then hears the crew. They're moving to clean the gunboat. And Simmons sends in to ask whether the captain has a minute. And Jack wonders, was I so unpleasant and forbidding the day before? Why Simmons being so formal here? And Jack invites him in for a cup of coffee. And Simmons tries to assess Jack's mood. And I love the way O'Brien phrases. He casts a reconnoitering look at him, reconnoitering to make a military observation of a place, like, kind of go check out the beach a few weeks before D-Day when you're going to be landing there. So I love this O'Brien turn of phrase. Well, Simmons says that he ventured to disturb the captain because of what Garin found on the gunboat. And Simmons says, I don't have your command of French. So he's handing him this book.
As right? Hardly anybody has ever said to Jack Aubrey.
Exactly. I'm thinking, either he doesn't know it at all, or he's like, okay, I got to tread gently here. I just upset the captain. I want to, oh, you're wonderful French, sir. Jack takes the lead-covered book. There's a signal for us, and looks through it. Lead-covered because, you want to drop this over the side anytime you're about to be engaged with the enemy here. And Jack is looking through it, and with a bright and lively eye, he says, here's a palm in Gilead, by God. Private signals, code by numbers, lights, recognition in fog, Spanish and other allied signals. So this is an absolute prize here. This is a French code book. And they're sitting there trying to figure out the meaning of some of the French. And maybe, Ian, you can talk about that, or we could post that in social media. But they finally decide, hey, it's got enough pictures. We can make out enough of this. And the codes are still valid. And Jack's thinking, probably till the change of the moon. And he's thinking, boy, I hope we can profit by having them, because there's still a good bit of time left while this book is in effect.
Yeah.
Now, palm in Gilead. I just, we were asking about, great Aubreyism, stuff like that. And I had actually forgotten this one. I was snickering, a nice Aubreyism. It should be a balm in Gilead from the prophet Jeremiah in the Old Testament, Jeremiah 8:22. And we're thinking, okay, it's just a little wordplay. But wait, if you go to the actual King James Version verse, which I think O'Brien would send us to because there wasn't an NIV back then at this day, is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Why then is not the health? Yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly. I was like, oh, wait, little goosebumps here. Where the physician? Where is our physician here? And then, why is not the health of the daughter of my people recovered? Or why is there no healing of the wound of my people, would be the NIV version of that, about the daughter. So again, what's O'Brien trying to tell us here? Cute little wordplay, little laugh, or something else.
Right. And but unaccountably, Jack does seem to have command of French. All these names for French flags and spars and masts and sails and stuff that he appears to have got pretty well. There's a funny one, which is Pavillon de Beaupré, a bowsprit flag, and Jack says that's a jack, and which in itself is a pun, because that is exactly, a jack is a name for a flag that's kind of hoisted in certain places on a ship. So the jack is a jack, says Jack.
Right.
So he's all right. Anyhow, indeed, by the way, it hasn't taken very much, has it, for Jack to forget the grisly, disheartening, sickening nature of the violence by the Chinese crew. He's like, oh, well, maybe it was worth it. Maybe all that torture and suffering and bloodshed was worth it, because now we've got the code book. Yay for me. Anyhow, Jack asks about the final preparations to this gunboat. Simmons says it'll be ready as soon as the decks are dry, and we get this nice joke about how naval superstition has it that senior officers can't possibly tolerate walking on a deck that's in any way wet at all. Jack says he'd been thinking about sending the gunboat down to Gibraltar with young Butler in charge, who'd pistoled the captain. And He was thinking of sending the others as well, who had done their job in what he called their heathen fashion, and he means the Chinese and the Malays. And Simmons says, maybe not them. Maybe send some of the ones who were not involved in taking the ship. He's got nothing against them, but all of this particular crew of Chinamen had been taken out of one particular armed junk, and they were almost certainly pirates. Similarly, the Malays had been taken out of a proa. He hasn't got a particular concrete basis for thinking this, but he's concerned that if you send them away as an intact company all by themselves, they might go back to their old ways. If they had found a scrap of evidence of their piracy when they'd originally been taken, then they would all have been hanged. But of course, there was no evidence because there were no witnesses, because they'd all somehow got killed. Maybe even been eaten, says the text. So remarks that they've made since then, says Simmons, leave me little room for doubt. Every other ship in that corner of Southeast Asia is a pirate if the occasion offers, and he wouldn't like to see them strung up. He says they work wonderfully. They've given up praying to their own images. They're obliging about refraining from spitting on the deck. So Jack says, yeah, indeed, let's not lead them into temptation. Little tiny paraphrase of the Lord's Prayer. Let's not lead them into temptation. Give the gunboat to Butler, he says, and have Butler pick out a suitable crew. Well done, Jack.
I love the, they've given up praying to images, which is one of the sins that Jeremiah was railing about
very good.
That chapter before. And I love how he pairs with it. And they've also given up spitting on decks. Yeah. here we are, the first commandment and spitting on decks. So they must be pretty good people. Yeah. But
I'm sure there's something in Jeremiah about not spitting on decks if you look closely.
Right. I'm sure there was. Well, the gunboat stays in company, we're told, until the Lively's launch pulls under her stern on the way inshore at dusk. And we've got a little humorous note here. Mr. Butler, packing his own quarterdeck, ordered the salute in a voice that started deep and shot up into a strangled, blushing squeak, his first experience of the anguish of command. And I'm thinking, Ian, we've been talking about the kind of themes running through the canon here. Here's Jack, who's been in the math class, who's helping the youngsters rise up the ranks. We've had the little 7-year-old, Mr. Randall Jr. here. Yeah. But we got this, moment on an otherwise kind of a tense situation here. The launch pulling towards shore in the dark.
And here we are. It's time to take Jack out of his lonely world of being separated from his particular friend. Wrapped in his boat cloak, with a dark lantern between his knees there, Jack is anticipating the pleasure of the moment. He had not seen Stephen Maturin, it says in the text, for a vast stretch of time, made even longer by the grinding monotony of the blockade. How lonely he had been for the want of that harsh, unpleasant voice. 259 men living in promiscuity, extreme promiscuity for the lower deck, and the 260th a hermit. So he's again referring to the loneliness of command. He also says that he wants to hear messages that Sophie might be sending through Stephen, and he wants to read letters that Stephen might be carrying for him. So all this weight of expectation piled up on this potential meeting with Stephen. He almost falls asleep as they come into Cala Blau, a place where he and Stephen had visited in the past, watching red-legged falcons. Jack has the crew put down their oars and shines his dark lantern in toward the shore. There is no answering light. Jack says, it's all right. There's only 10 minutes to go. There's a dozen reasons why Stephen might not be here. He doesn't have a naval sense of time. This is only the first of 4 possible rendezvous days. So no reason to be worried. And he notices the Pleiades, the star cluster on the horizon, and remembers taking Stephen from a lonely beach when the stars were just so. Now, we might come back to the Pleiades again at the end of the chapter, Mike, because there's a bit of significance there. But let's just say that there's a connection there to loneliness.
When the entire Pleiades is clear, Jack tries his light again. Again, no reply. He thinks perhaps Stephen just can't get his lantern lit. And he tells Bond, go ahead and run the boat in. I'm going to leave Stephen some private signals here. And Jack walks up and down the beach, turning over various private marks, things that he thinks will make Stephen smile if he misses his first rendezvous and then shows up early the next time and sees, Jack's been here and done all this. Well, Jack's starting to feel some tension, but not the devouring anxiety he had the first time he picked Stephen up before he knew Stephen's capabilities. And I'm thinking about, Jack in the bear suit and climbing through the mountains and all the trouble. It's like, what a long way we've come, even though we're only at the beginning of the third book here. Well, now Saturn comes up behind the Pleiades. So more time has evolved. And I think our tension thickens a little bit, Ian.
Yeah, Jack hears stones on the cliff path above. His heart lifts. He thinks this is Stephen coming. He sees a form moving up there, and Jack whistles a little phrase for a marriage of Figaro. He whistles "De vieni non tardar," which is sung by Susanna towards the end of the opera. The line means, "Oh, come, do not delay." There's no reply. And then a voice from halfway up. "Capitan Melbury?" Jack stands behind a rock and pulls out a pistol and cocks it. He calls out, "Come down," in a pleasant voice, and meanwhile calls over his shoulder to Bondon to pull out to take the boat away from the shore. A voice at the foot of the cliff whispers, "Where are you?" Jack, who is sure that he hears no other movement on the path above, steps out from the rock and shines the light on a man in a brown cloak with an olive-coloured face, with what O'Brien calls a fixed, wary expression. The man comes forward, opens his hands and says, "Capitan Melbury?" "Who are you, sir?" asked Jack. "Juan Maragall, sir," he whispered, in the clipped English of the Minorcans, very like that of Gibraltar. "I come from Esteban Domanova. He says, Sophia, Mapes, Guanerius." Melbury Lodge was the house they had shared. Stephen's full name was Maturini Domanova. No one else on earth knew that Jack had once nearly bought a Guanerius. He uncocked the pistol and thrust it back. "Where is he?" "Taken." "Taken?" "Taken. He gave me this for you." In the beam of the lantern, the paper showed a straggle of disconnected lines. "Dear J," some words, lines of figures, the signature S tailing away in the corner, a wavering curve. This is not his writing. Whispering still in the darkness, caution rising still over this certainty of complete disaster. This is not his hand. He has been tortured. End of chapter 2.
Whoa.
Well, Mike, we promised ourselves at the beginning a dum dum dum, and I think we've got one right there.
Oh, man.
Well, lots and lots to talk about. Let's just quickly dispense with another nice reference. Joan Maragall is the name of a Catalan poet from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. There's at least one road in Madrid named after him. There are many streets and a metro station in Barcelona named after him. So it's a nice little word choice there. But, wow, Mike, all that time without Stephen, and still here we are.
Right. We went all that time without Jack. Now we've got all this time without Stephen. I mean, what an incredibly wild ride these first two chapters have been. Yeah. They get the prize money. They lose the prize money. Stephen's identity's blown in a public meeting. Then Stephen with Sophie and the pagoda tree that we had last time, the importance of gold, and Diana going into keeping with Canning. Now we left him with Blaine not going on the mission. Well, here we've come all the way roundabout again. And in the meantime, we're with Jack's story, wanting to so badly to distinguish himself again. No idea yet that he's lost his prize money, but experienced enough to know to keep his fingers crossed, because prize money is never a sure thing. Even if you get it, your agent might run off with it. Right. I'm just so blown away by how much happens in chapter 1 and chapter 2, and how O'Brien had left us at the end of last chapter and then completely upended it in this chapter.
Right. And we've gone from riches to all kinds of poverty. We've got blockade duty, short commons, hardtack, weevils, midshipmen fantasizing about sausages. Jack's got nothing to put on his table for the officers. It's a really, really stark contrast. Also, I think the stark contrast between the calm, orderly life of the Livelies and their particular way of going about business. And what we discover is the piratical, grim, bloodthirsty life of a subset of the Livelies, which are the Chinese crew. Jack was being really easygoing, bless him, about the rendezvous, telling himself, it's all going to be fine. My friend's going to be there. There are all sorts of reasons why he's not going to be there at the beginning. Not worried about him being late. But now, Stephen doesn't have to worry about what to do with all the money. Stephen doesn't even have to worry about food. Stephen's actually in jail, and his life is in danger. His livelihood, not to mention his status as an intelligence agent, is in danger. And there's only one person he can rely on, and that's Jack.
Right.
Good news, though, we've got somebody Jack can rely on and who's really come to the fore in this chapter. Mike, that's our old friend, our new friend, you might say, Preserved Killick.
Yeah, I just love this. And it's, I think we've had plenty of O'Brien humor throughout, but, now we're inserting, here's a great one as the tension rises and falls, as things are going good or going bad. You always have this moment to drop Killick in. Fair act of pieces. Jesus, what a life.
I love it.
what a life here. And I'm thinking the same thing with all these plans and payoffs. Yeah. And once again, like I think you mentioned last chapter, Ian, none of this comes out of the blue. O'Brien has absolutely earned the position we find ourselves and our heroes find themselves in. Yeah. He's given us plenty of warning ahead of time. And I'm just blown away time and again by all the little things that O'Brien is inserting in here. Laurel, like you said, Laurel, simple reference, toxic thing, a little bit flavorful, too much poison. Well, also Laurel as this symbol for victory, glory, winning. Jack, who wants to win a victory for the Lively and for himself. This is his last chance to distinguish himself and get another ship. So is he going for the Laurel?
Yeah.
I'm thinking, is he the only one going for the Laurel? Was there anything else going on that kind of perhaps this could be a reference to?
Right. I mean, Stephen, for example, pursuing Catalan independence, pursuing the defeat of France. Perhaps he's now pushing so hard for Laurel that the warning that Sir Joseph Blaine gave us in the last chapter, he might have come unstuck here, and he might be tasting the bitter savor of having pushed himself too far in the pursuit of victory. And maybe also, Mike, we get the sweet taste of victory made bitter by Jack's sickening view of the piratical way that the Orientals in the Lively's crew went about their killing, that the sweet taste of victory was made a bit less palatable by seeing the way that some people went about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Even the little things like the little Aubreyism of the palm in Gilead, and going back and going, is there no physician there? Why then is there no healing for the wound of my people? Oh my gosh, O'Brien, are you surely that was not a little thing? Right. And Ian, you mentioned the Pleiades.
Right, the Pleiades, this fairly famous star cluster, also known as the Seven Sisters, because the actual the mythological Seven Sisters were the companions of the Greek god Artemis, known in Roman mythology not as Artemis but as Diana. And we had this earlier quote about the Pleiades back in Post Captain, where we have this poetic line: "The moon has set and the Pleiades, midnight is gone and the hours wear by, and here I lie alone, alone." This is what Stephen had been reflecting on as he saw the Pleiades. So we got this connection with this particular part of the night landscape and loneliness and Diana, which is just like, oh my gosh, a low moment for Stephen in every possible way.
I think we always find ourselves at the end of every chapter wondering, so what happens from here? Stephen captured being tortured on an island that they're both very familiar with, but is now occupied by the Spanish, who are allied with the French and at war with England.
Yeah. How's that going to go? By the way, we're still fairly near the beginning of that war. We've got months, years of that war still to come, and Jack's in a hurry. Jack's in a hurry to get through it and get his big distinction and his post-captain's command. His ability to do that, of course, is constrained in time at the minute by the fact that he might lose the Lively. If he's going to lose the Lively, what's going to be his next command? And speaking of Jack, the world now knows that he and Sophie are engaged. He's squared things somehow, probably on the promise of prize money with Mrs. Williams. But he's not going to get the prize money now, we know, at least not anything like what he thought he was going to. Are they going to put the marriage on hold? Is Jack going to have to tell the world that the engagement's off? Mrs. Williams was still in a fairly strong position and was calling the shots with regard to her daughter's future, certainly last time we heard directly from her.
Right. And I'm skipping over a big piece here, but when he finally does get to shore with no prize money, isn't he still subject to arrest? Not only to losing his engagement, but to arrest. And I'm a little worried about that. But I guess the most pressing thing is, okay, Stephen's here, we're here, he's being tortured. What do we do? Well, we've got the Livelies who are kind of ordered and aren't kind of made for this kind of cutting out stuff and everything. We've also got the Malays and the Chinese who, oh boy, they are more than well made for this. But everybody's sitting here thinking, hey, day after tomorrow, Captain Hammond's back. We're back to the regular thing.
Yeah.
I'm doing Gibraltar, but my particular friend is here. What does he do? What do the Livelies do? We had that moment of Jack going, fella, they're not going to follow you. Once again, do you do something? Do they follow you? What happens? Yeah. I don't know, Ian. There's, I think, only one way to find out.
I think you're right, Mike. I think maybe we should reach for another chapter. What do you say next week to one more chapter of Patrick O'Brian?
Oh, I should like that of all things.
Sorry, I was just distracted there. Let me get back into it. I've lost my mouse. It's all going so well. So
I know. Sorry, Sam.